What's up guys, Asian here again with another Trials Guide video, and today we're going to be going over Rakhat, the final boss of Maw of Lorkhaj. Now, Rakhat is definitely one of the more difficult fights in the game. Maw of Lorkhaj is a DLC trial and it is the last boss of the trial, which means that it has probably the most amount of mechanics in the game. Out of most of the other DLC Trials bosses, there's only a handful of other bosses that have as many mechanics that are as deadly as they are in Rakhat. So we're going to be going over each of the different mechanics step by step, kind of what we do, how you want to deal with them, and I will also provide links down in the description below to some images, kind of describing the different formations that you might want to use, different sort of strategies that you might want to use in dealing with these mechanics. So, starting things off first, so Rakhat here, this is the arena. So before we begin talking about mechanics, let's talk about the arena itself, because the arena, the way it's designed, kind of lends itself to the mechanics itself. Now you can see here that there's one central pad in the middle here, so that's where Rakhat begins, and that's where the fight is going to end. So at the very end, during execute phase, Rakhat will be in this center pad here. While, apologies ahead of time, come down with a cold, so I might be coughing and hacking during this explanation. But Rakhat starts off in the middle, and once the pull begins, this middle pad's going to be full of blue gunk. You don't want to touch it because it'll put a healing debuff on you, and if you touch it twice, basically if you have that debuff on you and you touch it again, you will die. So when we first start off here, you'll see that there are 8 pads around the arena. They are normally numbered, so this pad right here is where he begins. It's going to be pad 1, and then you go around clockwise. So this would be pad 2, 3, 4, 5 is the one closest to the entrance, 6, 7, and 8. So Rakhat will basically jump from one pad to the next in turn, and until he jumps through all the pads, and then he'll go through something known as Lunar Phase, at which point we will kind of swap over to a different video, so you guys can see what Lunar Phase looks like. And once you get past Lunar Phase, then it basically starts to cycle all over again. Now, most groups are going to want to avoid Lunar Phase. Lunar Phase is definitely difficult to deal with. It definitely involves a little bit more coordination and some pre-planning. But if your group doesn't have the DPS to get past a pad 7 burn, non-hard mode or hard mode, then you will probably have to do Lunar. So we will go over Lunar at the end of this video. So starting things off first, each pad has its own little mechanic that it kind of starts and ends. Starting on this first pad here, there are no mechanics. Each of the even number pads, that would be 2, 4, 6, and 8, a Hulk will spawn in the center, and this is basically the same thing as the Savage, just with more health and a little bit larger. And we'll go over the Hulk when we go over pad 2. And then pads 3, 5, and 7 each have their own mechanics that begin. So pad 3 will introduce the pad 3 mechanic, and it will continue until you hit pad 5. And once you hit pad 5, the pad 3 mechanic disappears, and then you just have to deal with the pad 5 mechanic, and so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and start off this fight here then. So we start off the fight here. Rakhat will basically port into the center, do a little slam, and you can see here that the pad that he's going to go to is going to glow yellow. And you can see here that the pad in the middle has turned blue. So this is what you don't want to touch. Blue is generally going to be very bad for you in this trial. So you don't want to touch this blue pad. It'll apply that healing debuff on you. And if you touch it twice, it'll kill you. Now this yellow glowing pad is going to be very important for the tank who is tanking Rakhat, because without this little glowing buff that it gives you, Rakhat is going to one-shot you. So this little glowing thing will give a buff called Lunar Bastion to one person who is standing on this pad. So it's always going to be the main tank that's standing on this pad. No other person should be standing on this pad at all, just in case that the main tank steps off of it and then he loses that buff. So it basically, the buff will remain on whoever person happens to get it first. If a person steps off of it, if another person is on it, they will gain that buff. So you just don't want to be touching this pad at all. Let's go ahead and moving on here. General idea here is for the tank to basically start off with Rakhat and then face him, so he's facing counterclockwise, so basically away from the group, and the group is going to be basically between the pad that Rakhat is on and the pad that he's going to go to. So remember that he goes clockwise, so clockwise is left hand against the wall, so he's going to go down this way behind him, You'll see here that Rate of Fire indicates incoming Dark Barrage. Dark Barrage is what we like to call the machine gun or gun. He basically charges up some energy in his hand that basically shoots it out like a machine gun towards the tank, and as well as anybody else who's behind him. It's a about a 120-degree cone, so you just don't want to be in front of Rakhat. So you can absorb it with Absorb Magic, but generally speaking, the healers will just place springs on the tank while the tank is spamming Absorb Magic in order to heal off of the gun. And then after a certain period of time, Rakhat will move on to the next pad here. So you'll know he will begin to go to the next pad when he ports into the center of the pad here, and then the next pad starts glowing yellow. When that happens, the main tank, who is taking Rakhat, will have to move immediately before he does what's called the Goomba Stomp. So he'll fly up into the air and stomp down on the pad, turning the pad blue. Tank obviously doesn't want to have that debuff because it does put a healing debuff on you, so you just want to make sure to move immediately to the next pad as soon as you see it start glowing yellow. Now you still want to make it so Rakhat faces away from the group, so remember that the group is going to be between where Rakhat is and where Rakhat is going to go. So we'll go ahead and take a look at how the main tank is going to be positioning Rakhat and how he's facing them away. Now you will see that a Hulk did spawn from the center, so the off tank is going to taunt that Hulk. And he's going to place him pretty much right next to Rakhat. So the idea is you want to basically put the Hulk right next to Rakhat so that way it dies to cleave. Some groups will focus the Hulk and then go back to Rakhat. It's kind of up to you. Most of the groups I run with generally cleave the Hulk down. Now you did see that the Hulk kind of crouched down there. That is an interruptible move. If you do not interrupt it, it'll basically stun everybody within a certain radius of him. I believe it's about 20 to 24 meters. So you just want to make sure you're interrupting that, particularly in hard mode, because it does deal damage as well as the stun. Just the stun itself is usually what's going to kill people, because when you're stunned, obviously you have to use break free, and it opens you up to getting damage from other mechanics. So you will need to interrupt that move when he crouches down like that. Now, just like the Savage, he does have his smash move, and a lot like Rakhat, when his ball is glowing blue, that's when the smash will go down. Now, unlike the Savages, you can't dodge roll this one. So basically what you have to do is you basically have to tank it. So generally what happens is the off tank will take 2 smashes, and then the main tank will take the Hulk for 1 smash. The reasoning for that is if you get hit by 3 smashes in a row, it basically puts an insane 30k bleed on you, and as you're basically going to be dead within 2 or 3 seconds. You're able to take basically 2 smashes before you have to swap, basically. So that's why we do 2 smashes, and then the main tank takes the Hulk for 1 smash. At that point, the debuff has worn off on the off tank, so the off tank can take it again for 2 smashes. So you can see here how the main tank has positioned Rakhat. So basically what he did was he basically stood pretty much right where the Hulk is right now, and then once Rakhat teleported over, he just kind of spun him around this way. Now you did see that Rakhat kind of faced the Hulk and was going to empower the Hulk. That's an interruptible as well. If he empowers the Hulk, I believe the Hulk does more damage. It doesn't really increase resistances, but I could be mistaken on that. So the main tank should interrupt it just to avoid that damage buff. Now for pad 2, this is where Darkness Falls will begin, so this is what we call Meteors. So for Meteors, it will basically always fall on the main tank, whoever has Taunt on Rakhat, and then it will target up the 4 farthest players from Rakhat. So in order to deal with this, you will have 4 players basically kite the Meteors. They're going to be behind the stack themselves, and it's typically going to be the 2 healers and 2 ranged DPS. This is for both hard mode and non-hard mode. So basically what you do is you basically run circles behind the group. So I'll have kind of a link to a picture below as to kind of your kiting paths. So you guys have a better idea and kind of a visual aid as well, because it's not very clear what the kiting paths will be just from this particular pad. So this is where Darkness Falls begins. It starts in pad 2, and it can basically occur at any of the pads starting at pad 2. See here that the meteors are falling. Now, Threshing Wings is another move that begins at pad 2. Basically kind of flaps his wings in the air and then does a big knockback. You can see here that Rate of Fire does advise you to block it. If you don't block it, it'll basically knock you back. I don't believe it does that much damage at all. But if it does knock you back, it might knock you backwards into one of these glowing pads here, which basically cleanses the debuff in the Backroom, which we'll be talking about in a little bit here. or it could knock you back into one of the blue pads if you're positioned like over here for some reason, because Rakhat is facing this way. So it's very important to block those threshing wings, particularly on hard mode. And now for pad 3. So pad 3 is where we're going to start seeing a new mechanic, and you can see here that the main tank has taunted the Hulk. So on pads 2, 4, 6, and 8, generally speaking, before Rakhat moves on, you'll be able to get 2 smashes. So the main tank will always taunt the Hulk when he moves to pads 3, 5, and 7, as well as after pad 8 if you guys are doing Lunar. So that's just something to keep in mind. As the main tank, you will be taking the Hulk when you go to pad 3, 5, and 7. You see one smash, and then I take the Hulk back. Now, on pads 3, 5, and 7, like I mentioned, there's new mechanics that pop up, so the new mechanic is going to be known as Void Explosion. But for 3, 5, and 7, there's also something called the Backroom. So I do have a video on this on my YouTube channel, so let's go ahead and actually try to find that real quick. I will open this in a new link. So the Backroom is basically... actually, let me go see if I can find it. So basically the back room is a room directly behind the space here. So if you take a look here, there's a doorway right here, and I'm going to try to find what is it? What would it be? Let's see if I have it still here. Okay. Okay, no, so this is the off tank video. Let's see if I can have... I believe I have... here it is. So this is the running mechanic. So this is on normal, but so there are a few differences between normal and vet. So if we go ahead and skip ahead to when we actually do the running mechanic. Yep, go back here. So in pads 3, 5, and 7, you're basically going to have 2 ranged DPS that go back here into what's called the back room. Sometimes we call it the litter box. So basically what happens is 2 people, sometimes 3, but usually it's going to be 2 people, go into this back room here. And you can see, it's kind of hard to see because my frames are covering up the synergy, but there is a synergy that you can hit called Eyes of Jode. And basically you see these little balls here with the fire. You're basically going to activate the synergy so that way the synergy hits the fire. And it'll basically put out the fire, and 1 or 2 things will happen. So the first thing is that nothing will spawn. The second thing is an assassin will spawn, which is basically a mob with about 35,000 health or so. You just need to kill it. The third thing that'll happen is you will have a cat summoner that spawns. So if we go ahead and go on ahead here. So in this back room here, you can see that there are balls that are floating around. If you run into them, they will damage you. Again, this is on normal, so they don't really hurt that badly, but on vet they do hurt fairly badly, so you will want to have a shield up. Now this is one of the summoner cats, so you will have 2 of these on each side. So there's kind of the left side, and then there's a middle, and then there's a right side. So generally speaking, you'll have 2 runners, and they'll both be responsible for left and right, and then they'll together take care of the middle ones. So you should have 2 of these on each side. Now when you kill both of the cats, basically on the left side for instance, then basically all the other bowls will basically have their fires put out. So don't bother using the synergy on bowls that don't have the fire out. It's basically going to be a waste of your time, basically, a waste of synergies. And that's basically it. So this is on normal. So with the vet, there is the introduction of assassins. Unfortunately, I don't have a video of that specifically. But the assassins, like I mentioned earlier, are just very weak mobs. They have maybe 30 to 40,000 health, so they can be killed pretty easily. When they first spawn, they'll apply a snare on you. It's about an 80% snare, so you can barely move. And then they will basically try to kill you. So that's why you want to have your shield up and just want to DPS it down. Then the snare will be removed, and you can continue to go along here. Now there are up to 2 assassins on each side as well, so sometimes you can get very unlucky and get 2 assassins right off the bat. Other times will get pretty lucky and you just get your first 2 cats right off the bat. So that's just something that you're going to have to play around with. So I will have routes down in the description below, kind of describing what is usually the optimal route that you should do as runners if you have 2 runners. Now going back to Rakhat here. The Rakhat fight here. So you can see here that one person has a growing AoE underneath them. This is called Unstable Void, otherwise known as Void Explosion. So basically when it grows, it'll explode and it'll shoot out balls. So if we go ahead and take a look here, you can see that they exploded and then balls come out. So these balls will damage everybody that they hit. It doesn't actually kill whoever has that AoE on them. So if you explode with that in group, all the balls are going to hit everybody all at once, and you're basically going to wipe the group. So you saw there that the person with the explosion ran into the corner here against the wall and faced the wall, so that way none of the balls really hit us too much. A lot of the balls are getting eaten by the wall, and then we only have one or two that fly out into group. So that's basically that mechanic here. Now for the backroom mechanic, there are 6 total cats here, and it's usually the job of the off tank to basically kind of keep an eye on the cats here. So actually let me back up a little bit. So you can see here that it's kind of hard to see because of the quality, but there are shadow cats there. So as each of the cats in the back room are killed, they'll just start disappearing. So normally, like somebody will call out 1 left, 2 center, or 1 left, 1 right, something like that. That'll basically give the runners an idea of whether or not they have to keep on killing cats, or if they can move on to the center or something like that. And this is basically going to continue for the entirety of this next pad. If you do not kill all of the cats, then it's going to be a group wipe. It's basically everybody dies. So it is very important to get all of the cats pretty much dead in the back room. If the back room is unable to basically do that job, then it's going to be a group wipe. So having good back room runners is very, very important. And so moving on to pad 4. Pad 4 is basically the exact same as pad 2, just so you still have to deal with Unstable Void. So we'll just move ahead. So this is pad 4. Another hook will spawn, deal with this the exact same way. And so when you come back from the back room here, you will see these pads here. You will have that debuff that you get that if you touch the blue pads. So you have the debuff, and if you touch the pads here, you'll be cleansed of that debuff. These pads do not respawn at all on hard mode, and they do not respawn, or I should say they don't respawn on non-hard mode, and they're non-existent on hard mode. So on hard mode, the debuff that you get from the pads as well as the back room, it actually will quote-unquote spread, in that if you're close to somebody who doesn't have the curse or even has the curse, you will basically form a connection that damages them. So for hard mode, again, we'll go over this at the end of the video, but for hard mode it's a very different strategy because you can't cleanse that debuff anymore. So again, pad 4 is very similar to pad 2. You just have to kind of deal with unstable voids. Generally speaking, you will not be on pad 4 long enough to get any sort of unstable voids. But sometimes you will have this unstable void carry over from pad 3 to pad 4. There should not be any unstable void in pad 4. I've never seen them, but I am not 100% certain on that. Starting on pad 5, runners have to go out again. So again, this is going to be the backroom runners. So on non-hard mode, the same people can go out if they want, but on hard mode, it has to be 2 different people. Again, we'll go over that at the end of the video. So on pad 5, we're going to have what's called Tethers. So you can see this blue ball that's going to be attached to me. They spawn from the center, and they'll go out to one random person and basically form a tether. Much like the blue balls from the explosion, they basically damage anybody that they manage to touch. So if you basically have a tether in group, that usually ends up damaging everybody in the group. So what you basically want to do is you just want to bring the tethers outside of group. So you can see here that you basically want to kite around out towards the walls to get that tether out of group, so that way you're not damaging everybody in that group. And then beyond that, so you can see here there's a tether right there. The tether is in group, so you want to basically take that out of group because it'll continuously follow you around. So you can see here that it's still following me, and so it still wants to attach to me. So you basically want to draw them outside of the melee group that way. You still get meteors. So again, the meteors hit the 4 farthest person as well as the main tank, and then you still get the gun as well. So healers, just be mindful of the guns as well. And you still also get threshing wings as well, so it's important to basically block those threshing wings. Now, one thing I also failed to mention here is that if you die with the debuff, you will basically spawn cats. Cats will spawn from your bodies. These cats are very similar to the cats that spawn in Zatasha in that they can't be taunted, they can't be chained, and they can't be rooted. Pad 6, we have the Hulk that spawns again. So again, just want to take care of the Hulk. Make sure to interrupt the stun. And at this point here, tethers will disappear. There will be no tethers that spawn during pad 6. This pad 6 is basically just dealing with the Hulk. Now for pad 7 here, there's going to be what's called beach balls that spawn. So you can see that these AoEs will spawn. This will basically tell you where these giant blue balls are going to spawn. And much like, as you can imagine, the other blue balls, they will damage whoever is standing in them. They just deal damage over a larger area. So they generally spawn on a random person. So the general idea here is if you are not doing, if you don't plan on doing Lunar, to basically stack up and just basically move left and right accordingly, so that way you always know where the balls are going to spawn. And then once Rakhat hits 11%, he goes into center for execute. So it's very important before you go into execute here that you kill the Hulk. Having two Hulks out is going to be very dangerous because there is a Hulk that spawns during execute. So from pad 5 here. So going into execute, basically all the mechanics from from pads 3, 5, and 7 will occur. So you get the unstable void, the void explosions, you get the tethers, and you get the beach balls. So there's a lot of damage coming in. Now, during execute, the center pad will be safe to stand on. It will no longer be blue, but all the outside pads will be blue. Now, balls will spawn on each of the pads, starting at pad 1 and going around the circle, pad 2, pad 3, pad 4. These balls will form a connection to Rakhat, and it basically gives them a small damage reduction. It's basically a little bit of damage resistance. So the more balls that are connected to him, the higher the damage resistance is going to be. So generally speaking, you will have one person take the ball, basically step onto the pad and basically take the ball. You don't have to use any synergy, you just have to run over it, and that'll break the connection and basically reduce Rakkhat's resistances back down to normal. So if we go ahead and start here, go into execute here. So you can see here all the pads have turned blue, and then the middle pad is clear. You can see here we do have a tether back on. Now there is going to be another Hulk that spawns from pad 5. So you can see here it has to spawn here. And this is basically the exact same idea. Off tank takes 2 smashes, main tank takes 1 smash, and so on and so forth until Rakhat dies. So it's very important to continue to play the mechanics here, and you can see that the little balls here, you can see that ball. This is what I was talking about, the ball that creates a damage resistance buff on Rakhat. You do need to run over this and collect it in order to basically break this connection and return his resistances back to normal. And because you are running over the pad, you will get that debuff. So if you already have the debuff, when you try to reach into it, you will not be able to grab the ball. You will instead die. So you can see here we have 2 orbs up, which basically reduces the damage he takes by a considerable margin. And that is it for non-hard mode. So now let's go over hard mode first, then we'll go over Lunar Phase. So we'll go over to a hard mode stream here. See if I can find one. Actually, I don't think this is it. So this is a hard mode attempt here with Mayflower. So the differences between hard mode is obviously it has more health. So you can see here. Actually, I'm not sure if you can see. Let's go full screen. So he has about 80 million health, 80.8 million health compared to 64 point something million health. So he has more health and he just does a little bit more damage. Now let's see if this is one of the more successful attempts. Alright, so you can see here that we do have assassins that spawn. So let's see if we can go back a little bit here to see where they actually spawn. Okay. So the assassins that spawn on hard mode spawn whenever you kill 2 cats in the back room, and they have to be cats on the same side. So when you kill 2 left cats, you'll spawn an assassin. if you kill one left and one center cat, you will not spawn the assassin. So there'll be 3 assassins that spawn in total. They are basically these dual-wield cats that spawn from the center. Off-tank basically has to taunt them, bring them into the group. And they basically don't hit very hard, but they do have one attack that is particularly dangerous, and that's basically their Steel Tornado. See if we can see what it does. Basically, you're going to see a AoE that forms around the assassin, and when the assassin does that, basically it'll knock everybody back if you are not blocking that. I don't know if we'll be able to see it. So this is one of the wipe ones. This is one of the wipe pulls. This is a Mayflower progression run. We were progressing through hard mode. But other than that, the mechanics are basically the exact same. And unfortunately, I do not have a hard mode backroom running video to show you guys. Those are, I don't DPS. I have never DPS hard mode Maw before. So guys, so you can see here that the assassin has spawned. Just going to take the assassin, basically stack them right on top of Rakhat here. And so that's the Steel Tornado that you saw there. So it will knock you back if you don't block it. It doesn't do that much damage, but the knockback can knock you back into one of the blue circles. So you just want to make sure to block that. Now let's see if we can move on. Let's see if we move on to pad 5 here. Okay. So we managed to move on to pad 5 here. And so you can see here that it's kind of hard to see his name, but this is Darwin here. He has the debuff. And so basically what that debuff does is it again puts a healing debuff on you, and if you touch any of the blue pads again, you will die. And it is not removed when you are rezzed. It remains on you even if you are rezzed. And if he happens to stand close to any of us, it will actually be a beam that connects to one of us and basically damages us. And eventually, if we stand in that beam long enough, then we will also get that debuff as well. See if we manage to get into execute. Nope, this is a wipe. Let's see which one it is. So I believe this is one of the times we've cleared it. And we do not do Lunar Phase. We didn't do Lunar Phase at all here. Okay, so in execute for hard mode, because you have your 4 runners who have the debuff, they can't actually touch the balls. So for execute on hard mode, you actually need to have the stamina DPS who do not typically run, as well as the supports take the balls instead. So each stamina DPS is going to basically get one of the 4 cardinal directions, and then the support roles will generally get the 4 corner ones with the healer on opposite sides here. Other than that, execute basically plays out the exact same way. And like I mentioned earlier, I will have images down in the description below for you guys to kind of use as a reference point. Alright, now moving on to Lunar Phase. So Lunar Phase is something that most groups will try to avoid doing, but some other groups will actually try to do it, either because they need to get the achievement Fang Focused, or because they don't have the DPS to finish off hard mode without going into Lunar Phase. So let me see. I do believe this is a. I just need to make sure. Okay, yeah. So this is the Lunar Phase. So I just got to go into when it starts. So this is pad 7. All right. So now we're on. Is this still pad 7? Yeah. This is. Nope. Okay. So that was pad 7. So going into Lunar Phase here, this is pad 8, so you'll get the Hulk. If you do decide to do Lunar Phase, you should focus this Hulk down. You don't want the Hulk alive during Lunar Phase. It's really, really bad because of that stun. So going into Lunar Phase, it's important to have everybody alive, as well as make sure everybody doesn't have the debuff on them. So basically, you just want to focus the Hulk down, make sure all the DPS are alive, and each of the DPS is going to be assigned to one of the pads here. So 1 DPS on 1 pad, so pad 1 has 1 DPS, pad 2 has another DPS, and so on and so forth, because in Lunar Phase you will have an ad that spawns on each of these pads. 2 healers and the 2 tanks are going to go into the center pad, so all the pads will be yellow, so you can stand on all the pads during Lunar Phase. During this time, Rakhat basically charging up a Spirit Bomb, and if you're not on one of the pads when he launches it, you will die. So you can see here we're just going to try to kill the Hulk here. So once the Hulk is dead, as you can see here that now all the pads have turned blue, which means we're going to be going into Lunar Phase. So during this intermission period, we're just going to kill the Hulk. And you can see that all of the pads have turned yellow in turn here, and you have one ad that spawned on each of them. Now there are going to be 3 different ads. There's going to be the Sun Eaters, you have the Archers, and then you have the Sword and Boards. I'm not sure if they're 2-handers. We'll find out. Yes, there is a 2-hander right there in front of me actually. So none of these ads actually have any of their special moves. So the 2-handers don't have the smash, Sun Eaters don't have the gates. They basically just have their standard moves. The most dangerous one is going to be the Sword and Board as a DPS if you don't block it. His heavy attack, it could one-shot you, and it could if it doesn't one-shot you, it can knock you off of the pad, which if done at an inopportune time, basically means you're going to die from that Spirit Bomb move that I mentioned earlier. Now, the healers and the tanks in the center pad will have a synergy that is basically a super powerful Jesus Beam that you can use on one of the ads. So you can see here, we use Healing Combustion. And so you can see here you'll have a synergy that pops up, and it basically is a supercharged Jesus Beam. And on the ad, it does a crap ton of damage, so that's basically how you help out your DPS in terms of killing these ads here. Each of the ads has about 2 million health. Basically what you do is you basically rotate around sort of like a pinwheel. So you have one tank and one healer basically beam ads on pads 5 and pads 1. Then the next set of healers, tank does pad 2 and pad 6, and so on and so forth until all the ads are dead. If there are any ads remaining after Lunar Phase, you basically just kill them. So this is what basically Lunar Phase looks like. As you can see, we killed one ad, and now we're beaming the second set of ads, and we're getting ready for the next beam. So you can see here the synergy is called Celestial Purge. You do basically have to target the ad itself in order to use it. And once your ad is dead, the ads actually do not leave the pads at all. So you can see here until Rakhat basically slams down his Spirit Bomb. And once that happens, it basically starts all over again. So any ads that are still alive basically just can now run around, and you just bring them over and you just cleave them down. Pretty simple and straightforward. Now after Lunar Phase, there is going to be a slight change. Basically everything repeats itself. The only difference is you will get Meteors on pad 1. You still get the Hulk that spawned on pad 2, 4, and 6, and you still get the mechanics, so you still get Void Explosion and everything like that. However, after Lunar Phase, after every single time he smashes down the pads, he will spawn an Archer. So you saw an Archer spawned here. We have a third tank, I should say, that's basically taking the Archers away. This is basically what happens when you do Lunar Phase. You have another set of ads to deal with. Now, if you're going for Fang Focus, you basically want to have three of these Archers up at a time, and basically you just want to bring them out into a corner. But if you're not doing this for Fang Focus, if you're doing this because you don't have the DPS to do a pad 7 burn, then generally speaking, the off tank will just line of sight the Archers so that the way they're right on top of Rakhat. They are a little bit wonky with taunt. You can see here that even though our tank is taunting them, he still likes to come back here to kind of hit us. So just keep on taunting them. They're a little wonky with the taunt statuses there. And again, I will have images down below in the description for each of these different fights here. So I will have one for Lunar Phase, I will have one for Hard Moon positioning for kiting Meteors, and I will have as well as the running patterns for 2 runners, and I think I have one for 3 runners as well if you want to do 3 runners. So most groups will do 2 runners in the back room instead of 3, just so that way you manage to keep DPS up in this room, in the main room, because if you have 3 runners back there, you're losing 3 DPS, which means it's more likely you're not going to be able to meet that DPS check, and you will have to do a Lunar Phase. So that is it for this Trials boss guide. Like I said, Rakhat is definitely one of the more mechanic-heavy boss fights. It's a very fun fight. I really enjoy Rakhat. I think it's one of my favorite fights in the game. If you guys have any questions about the mechanics, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. And again, I do have photos down in the description for kind of the strategies as well as the formations that we use. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.